So before I get too deep into this next story, just let me say I am not a huge fan of baseball. I mean, I think that pretty much everybody can kind of get a pretty good idea of what it is that I actually like. I mean, I like hockey, I like football, I like MMA, I like boxing, but I'm not really a huge fan of baseball. I find that it's way too slow paced. Not nearly enough happens. It's a lot of waiting for not very much payoff, in my opinion. But I am going to talk about a baseball-related story because the Trevor Bauer situation that erupted here a few days ago is an absolutely astonishing indictment of the way that we as a society do look at issues related to sexual assault. I'm just going to come out and say it. I'm not monetized on this channel. I'm not losing anything. I'm not losing out on anything by saying these words. They demonetize these videos. They're not monetizing them in the first place. I'm not doing it for money. And I'm doing it, to express my ideas. And so I do feel that this was an absolute indictment of the way that we tend to look at these issues. Especially given the fact that Trevor Bauer, on the face of a mere accusation from a woman who had, definitely had a relationship of some sort, had definitely had a liaison at the very least with him. Just based on her accusation, they suspended him for 2 years from Major League Baseball with basically absolutely no evidence. And not only with no evidence, but they couldn't have even looked at the evidence that they actually had. And so to kind of just try to put the whole story in a nutshell briefly, was that there was a woman by the name of Lindsey Hill who accused Trevor Bauer of having abused her during a sexual encounter. The allegations spurred the Major League Baseball to, have what had to have been the shortest and least in-depth investigation that there ever could have been into allegations this serious. And then they decided that he was going to be subject to a 2-year suspension. So the LA Dodgers terminated his contract, and Trevor Bauer went off to play baseball in Japan rather than playing for the Dodgers. And so there were lawsuits that were involved in it. He sued her, she countersued him. And apparently this past week, they finally settled these lawsuits, and now they can both actually kind of talk about it. And so Trevor Bauer has actually been able to put out all of the evidence that he had. And the evidence that he had, that Major League Baseball probably could have gotten access to if they had just put in any amount of effort, was in and of themselves, like just the text messages alone, were incredibly damning of this woman. Where she just basically, in the course of these text conversations with her friends, basically just said, yeah, you know what? Just going to go get his money. He's worth $51 million. I'm just going to go get his money. And then that's pretty much, well, she didn't actually get his money, but God knows it's pretty obvious that she made every single effort that she possibly could to try to get his money. And while it is absolutely stultifying that the Major League Baseball organization could hand down a suspension the likes of which they did without having done virtually any kind of investigation whatsoever, the biggest question that actually comes to my mind, having looked into this whole situation myself, is how did somebody like Lindsey Hill ever get close enough to Trevor Bauer to start a relationship with him in the first place? And I asked that question for one specific reason. And that was because of all the individuals that were involved in these text messages that Lindsey Hill was exchanging with her friends, talking about going after Bauer's money. One of them was a former pitcher for the San Diego Padres by the name of Jacob Nix, who basically told her, yeah, you got to get that bag. So she's in these text conversations with her friends, basically not really going into great detail about how exactly she's going to defraud him to get his money, but basically talking about defrauding him to get his money. And there's a major league pitcher involved in these conversations, which turns out to be like one of 2 players with the San Diego Padres that this woman has had relations with. It seems to me that this is not coincidental. Somehow, she is gaining some pretty privileged access, to these players and these organizations to be able to meet these guys and have these relationships with them. So it seems to me like there are real questions, security questions, that have to be addressed within Major League Baseball to figure out how the hell did somebody like this get the level of access that she had in the first damn place. It seems like somebody on the inside was definitely making that possible. Was definitely making at least the initial contact possible. Now, Lindsey Hill is a very pretty girl, and there is no doubt that, very pretty girls do have a much easier time getting access to professional athletes than, say, average women. I think that might do well enough to explain maybe one such relationship at the level of access necessary to establish 3. There's something else going there. So it seems to me that maybe Major League Baseball has a responsibility here that is far beyond just the fact that they did not bother to conduct their investigation properly. They didn't really put very much effort whatsoever into trying to figure out what the truth of the allegations was. I think that there might be a question here about who they are allowing to have access to their players and who they're allowing to have access to places where their players are going to, that some of these organizations really ought to be searching for an answer to, and I haven't really seen any sign that these are questions that people are even asking, or even things that are being addressed within these organizations. Now, obviously, Major League Baseball is not the babysitter of these men, and that is true. There's only a limited amount of power that they have to control who these men are forming relationships with, who their friends are, such and such. Fair enough. But it seems to me like they have a tremendous amount of power over who they allow to get access to their players through their channels, through their organizations, through their events, through their associations. And it seems to me that they definitely need to be looking into that and making sure that this is something that can't happen through those associations. And also Jacob Nix, who ironically, also pretty much washed out of Major League Baseball and now plays in Japan, where Trevor Bauer now plays. Yeah, Jacob Nix should never be allowed to play baseball again. The idea that anybody would allow this guy into their locker room is a pretty stunning thought. So I think that even if they don't really look into this thing about how Lindsey Hill got access to Trevor Bauer in the first place, I kind of feel like the other thing is definitely very doable.